Hello, everyone. My name is Salina May. My pronouns are she and hers, and I'm grateful to be back in this community exploring trauma sensitive classrooms. So, today is our last session together, and we'll have some welcome, we'll explore invitations, we'll review our previous tenets of trauma sensitive practice: empowerment, voice, choice, predictability, consistency, and then we'll explore this new tenet: caring relationships. And so this is a little more webinar style because I can't be with you all in person today. So I'm really grateful for your flexibility and your willingness to still explore this topic a little more independently. And so you might be reviewing this on your own, or you might be reviewing this in a group. And so there'll be opportunities to either share with a partner, explore, and you all are in control of the pause button or the fast forward button. So I trust you all to get what you need from this time and to be in control, whether that's connecting with a partner, connecting in a group, pausing and reflecting, or just really enjoying being in your own individual reflection. So these are our invitations. I always love our invitations to help us set the container and have some shared agreements and some understanding and some framework. So I really invite us to be open to learn. We've heard some of this content now every time we come together in session, and so the invitation is to see, can you see it a little bit differently? Can you learn something new today, even though you might have heard it before? I invite mindfulness of your power and positionality. So all of us are coming into this room with different identities, with different layers of power or privilege, seniority. And there's just an invitation to notice how that might be playing if you are in a whole group, or even if you're engaging this content on your own. How can you be aware of the layers of your identity and your power or privilege, or the ways that you may be on the margins? How might that impact how you engage with this content? And of course, big invitation to show up as best as you can in this moment. It's May. You might be looking towards wrapping the year, culmination, graduations, report cards, conferences, just all that comes as you are navigating closing an incredible, extraordinary year as a second year teaching in the pandemic. So wherever you are, just an invitation to show up as best as you can and take care of your body, take care of your needs. And if you are with a partner or in a group, there's an invitation to empathetically listen. Of course, to yourself, to your body, to your emotions, to your thoughts, and also to the people you're in community with. So if you are in a group, and you all again can pause this if you need more time. I'm going to linger for a moment if you're in a group, or if you're by yourself. What is an invitation that will help you just center this work today, that will help you show up as best as you can in this moment? So just take a moment to decide which invitation is going to be best supportive for you in this work today. Beautiful. So thinking about the last session that we had, we focused on empowerment and agency and choice. And so I'm curious, what do you recall from our last session? What do you remember? What were some of those key takeaways? And how can empowerment and agency support trauma survivors? Can you think of an example of a trauma-sensitive practice that you or one of your colleagues implemented in their classroom recently? So sitting with these questions, and because I always love to offer choice, your body is brilliant. You know what you need and you know how you best learn. So if you want to sit and journal for a moment, or just reflect with your cup of tea or water or coffee, or if you feel inspired, if you're in a group, just to take a couple moments to share, I'm going to pause briefly. And again, you can hit the pause button if you'd like to take as much time as you need to reflect on these questions. Beautiful. So I know last time we were together, I was really inspired and touched by the variety of ways that I saw many of you creating powerful classrooms that integrated some of these trauma sensitive practices, such as following up with students one on one, giving them affirmations, having mindful moments. And so just taking in and celebrating all that all of you are doing every day to create these safe and brave classrooms for all students, and especially our trauma survivors to thrive. So, just going to bring us back, as this is our final session in this trauma sensitive series. Just want to invoke some of the content that we already touched on, right? So remembering that trauma occurs when a person perceives themselves or others around them to be threatened by serious injury, death, or psychological harm. Trauma is a natural response to a stimulus that overwhelms the sympathetic nervous system. Stress becomes a trauma when we are unable to adequately cope with a stressor. And so we may not have the internal resources or the external resources to support us in navigating and coping. And we discussed that you could have the same group of humans who experience the same event, but not everyone will identify it as a trauma. It really depends on their internal resources or external resources and their personality and how it impacted them. And trauma is self-identified. And you'll hear me often use the word trauma survivor. As a trauma survivor myself, I I feel empowered by this phrase. It helps me change the narrative, especially around events that happened to me, especially as a child, that I didn't have much agency or choice around how those things played out. So in not everyone will identify or appreciate that word, but that's just an invitation. It might resonate with you. And so we have our acute traumas, car accident, childhood trauma, or adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, sexual trauma, natural disasters, unexpected deaths of loved ones, illness, surgery. And we have our chronic, and we're really highlighting the impact of this global pandemic that's had on our young people and our adults in our education systems in the last couple of years, and especially the way that's intersected and impacted our most marginalized students, our global majority youth, our youth of color, maybe our queer youth. Chronic trauma is also racialized trauma, microaggressions, bullying, domestic violence, war or political violence, colonization, and again, ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So you may just be again thinking about the young people in your community and what you know about some of them and some of the experiences that may have contributed to creating trauma in their lives. Now, I want to bring in this frame, and this is a frame that we've held throughout this series, right? Often, and especially in my own life, when I perceive myself as a trauma victim, when I saw my trauma as some bad reflection of me, something that made me broken, that was a really disempowering place to view it from. And what I've discovered in my own healing journey and through supporting youth that identify as trauma survivors and marginalized youth for the past 20 years, I really see that there's this beautiful transformation that occurs when we bring that mindfulness and love and compassion to these places we perceive as broken. And these trauma sensitive practices, which are always evolving because we're learning more and more all the time about how to support the most marginalized in our communities, they help create that energy of transformation when students feel safe enough to heal in our classrooms and in our school communities, and that's our hope. So the tenets of our trauma sensitive care are consistency and predictability. And that's how we create safety. physical safety, healthy and explicit boundaries and expectations, accountability. We create trust through caring relationships, which we'll focus on a little bit today. Acceptance, non judgment, compassion, mutual respect, connection. We restore power through empowerment, voice, and choice, through offering multiple modalities of learning, giving opportunities for feedback, equity of voice, empathetic listening, explicit SEL, social emotional skill building. And we liberate through culturally responsive teaching, which culturally responsive teaching and trauma sensitive teaching, they hold hands. They're absolutely a part. And through that, we acknowledge power and privilege. We take a pro-Black stance. We uplift, celebrate, integrate the multiple cultural perspectives in our classroom. So together, this can create a web of safety and bravery, which help empower our young people to view their traumas as not these things that make them broken, but these life experiences that they learned and overcame and heal. I love the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who has this expression, no mud, no lotus, right? That this beautiful flower, the lotus, actually thrives in the mud. That those darkest, muddiest places that maybe you wouldn't expect anything beautiful to bloom, that actually that it creates that fertile soil for resiliency, empowerment, and healing. And that's the lens I invite us to look at our youth from who've experienced trauma. So I want to just review these. We already dabbled in these, and as we review them, you might be, again, reflecting on ways that you've integrated more predictability and consistency into your classroom, or listen to the ways that other folks in your department or your colleagues, things that you want to uplift. So just taking a moment here, what are ways that you are already integrating predictability and consistency in your classroom? And these are things many good teachers do. Predictability and consistency is, I think, one of the most achievable and concrete tenets. And it's often something that teachers do. It's good practice, right? So we have the agenda. We create routines. We have clear instructions that are accessible and in multiple modalities. We create clear procedures and breaks. And this is a way that it comes through the classroom. And we also talked about the importance of a school container, and acknowledging that as Bishop has been undergoing a change in leadership, that there's been some lack of clarity around school-wide expectations, and noticing the way that impacts our classroom. So that's something we talked about. How can we create protocol in our classrooms that reflects school-wide protocol? And this is a growth area and intention for the community as you all are exploring in this transition of leadership. I just want to hang out there for a moment, just inviting you to, again, recall what we explored last time together with predictability and consistency. And as we move towards the close of the year, some students, especially those who are very sensitive to transition and change, and maybe it's graduating from high school, maybe it's going into a new year with new teachers, with new classmates. Students' anxieties can be up around what's coming next. School also creates a lot of consistency and predictability for students who may not have that in their home. So just pausing here for a moment, what are ways that you might be able to revisit or strengthen or prepare your scholars for some of the transition that might be coming up in June? And knowing that sometimes at the end of the year, there's even special schedules, there's special events that come. And some of our most marginalized students can be really sensitive to these changes. So I just want to linger here. If you want to share with a partner or journal, just pause here for a moment, and how might you move towards the end of the school year and amplifying some of that predictability and consistency for your scholars. And again, pressing the pause button if you need more time. I'm going to continue here. So coming to empowerment, choice, and voice, which is what we explored last time when we were together. And this, I've said this multiple times, but this is my favorite tenet. So when we empower youth, we see them as trauma survivors rather than victims. We support them in telling and owning their own narrative. They get to tell their story however they'd like. And can it be one of learning and growth and healing and acknowledging the both and in it? We give them explicit SEL tools to navigate, heal, and transform their trauma. So we give them ways to cope. We give them ways to heal. And we create a safe and a brave space for trauma survivors to thrive. And so we want our schools and our classrooms to be places that facilitate healing. Oops. When we create choice, we empower students to get to know themselves better, and we want this for our students, especially as they prepare to leave high school and go into college or their careers. We want them to know themselves better. We want them to know what works for them, what doesn't work for them. We give students opportunities to advocate for themselves and their needs. We create more freedom for students who've been historically marginalized. So particularly our global majority youth, our Black youth, our brown youth, our queer youth. We want to support them in having more choice and creating, creating new pathways. And when we create space for voice, we value the voices of students who've been historically marginalized and silenced. We affirm the unique ideas and expressions of our students. We build confidence and self-esteem, and we create a culture of listening. These are all beautiful things, right? Now, last time we focused on a few different strategies. And again, I want to invite them in because especially as we move towards the close of the year, this is a great time and a natural time to receive feedback. And whether you're coming back next year in the same role, or maybe you're transitioning to a new opportunity, whatever is happening for you in your life, it's a great opportunity to give feedback. And so we explored some of the ways, and I'm just going to give you a moment to look at these ideas since we reviewed them last time. And just noticing, are there any of these that stand out to you as something you want to practice? Beginning to close the year, and sometimes this might happen like the last week of school. I really encourage you, if time permits, and I know sometimes as we move towards the close of the year, things can get so tight and it's difficult to find the moment, but I encourage you, with a few weeks left, do your feedback survey or your feedback process and share back what you learned and bring that humility. Let your students know you heard them. And even if you're not having them as students in the future, just giving them that experience of, hey, I really value your feedback. I'm listening, I'm hearing. That actually can give them a corrective experience. So especially as trauma survivors, marginalized youth, youth on the margins, global majority youth who have been historically silenced or invisibilized. When they have a caring adult mirror back to them, hey, I care about your opinion. I'm listening to your opinion. And did I catch it right? It can be a corrective experience. I urge you to have some sort of feedback process. So again, I'm going to pause here, and if you want to jot some ideas down, think about how you might integrate some feedback loops into your end of the year closing practices, or brainstorm with a partner, go ahead and do that. Okay, and again, feeling free to pause for as much time as you'd like. Now, these were two that we didn't quite get to last session, so I wanted to spend a little bit more time here. So, choice and invitation. I tell you, this is one that I've had a lot of resistance to personally, but I've learned to really enjoy offering choice. Often, in our very rigid educational system here in the United States, in our conventional educational systems, it can feel tricky. Like, when can we offer choice? And so, my invitation for you is, how can you find all the opportunities for some contained choice, so that for our young people who experience so many mandates, so many because I told you to, so many rules and expectations that they did not get a voice in, whether that's through their family systems, parents, the government, teachers, school staff, community members, or police, it can be very liberating in these small ways to offer opportunities for choice for our young people. So I like to give a contained amount of options, because sometimes so many options can be overwhelming, but 2 to 3 choices. And these are a few ways that I like to think about offering choice. So the modality of assignment often is veteran educators. We know this is good practice, right? We want to have written options for our students who love to write, some kinesthetic options whose students who are really embodied, maybe some expressive arts, right? Partner or independent. Now, this I do believe that collaborative work is really important, and knowing that not all students have safety and working with other students, or there might be some aspects of their identity that feel really vulnerable, whether they are trans or an immigrant, or even just feeling a tenderness of a recent trauma that might have surfaced in their life. It can feel really vulnerable to work with another group. And so I'm not saying never do that, because I do think it's important that students get those social skills and learn how to collaborate. But I do believe that there should be some choice. And so, just in the way sometimes I offer to you all, do you prefer to be in your own energy right now and just focus on this in yourself? Or would you like to work with a partner? And varying it. Flexible due dates. Now, we have some due dates that are rigid. Often there's report cards, or when state testing is due, or assessments. Like, there are some due dates that have to be mandated for a variety of reasons. And then there's times when we can be flexible. And my invitation for you is to practice how do you do that dance, right? Of not enabling or being too flexible. And we saw this a lot in the pandemic, when teachers wanted to offer a lot of grace, but they found that they let go too much of the expectations. So this is a dance and a listening. How can we be flexible when we can, especially when we see that a student has a recent trauma that's been evoked for them? Being mindful of the pairing in the groups. Now, this is something I'm particularly sensitive around for uh, students in our queer community, um, who often experience systematic bullying or othering. I really invite you to be mindful of the group pairings, and I know this is something that many of you probably do already, but I just wanted to lift that up, of creating and supportive groups for students to thrive. Um, Offering choice with some of the content or the agenda. There are places where we can ask our students, hey, what do you all want to do today? These are 2 to 3 options. We can do this, we can do this, or we can do this, right? I love to give students during independent work time sometimes the option of music, and giving them each turn to get to choose a song or what that is a way both to share who they are and yeah, to feel like they have some little space where they can bring themselves. Sometimes on these beautiful spring days in May, we can ask our class, hey, do we want to do class outside or inside today? Do we want to do it in the garden? Do we want, just choice of place. Invitational language, when at all possible. When I first started teaching mindfulness, this was huge for me. This was a big shift because I was really used to mandating, directing. You have to do this. This is mandatory. And there are times when we can, again, offer choice, and even just the language I've noticed is liberating for young people. You may, if you feel called, if you feel inspired, if you'd like, if you feel moved, and that allows young people to think about, what do I want? And ultimately, we really want them to know what they want, know what they need, and advocate it for it. So offering distinct can do's and must do's. And, I used to teach first grade. I also taught high school and middle school for a long time. But when I taught first grade, they did a lot of choice time. And after I taught first grade and then I taught eighth grade, first grade, and then I went to high school. And I brought choice time into high school, and I was surprised at just how much joy it brought my students to have time where they have, again, options. There's a menu of activities, so it's contained. It's not, you can do whatever you want, but within some parameters, giving them some free time. Our young people have so much structure often in their lives. With school, can often feel very structured, which again is a part of our trauma sensitivity. We want them to have predictability and consistency. And where there's room and where there's safety, can we give them a little more breathing room, some choice? So I invite you to look at these and again, just think about, what am I doing already? What might I want to do a little bit differently? Where can I bring some of this to my classroom or my students? Or you might even think, you might have a few scholars that come to mind and you're like, oh, that would work really well with them. So again, if you feel called to press pause, you might do that. You might draw, you might go to your lesson plan book, or you might sit with a partner and explore this. So just taking the time that you need to reflect on choice and invitation. Okay, beautiful. So I want to move us to our last tenet here of, and again, when I said last tenet, I want to be clear. This is a evolving body of work of what is trauma sensitive practice. We're learning all the time. But for our work today and in this series, caring relationships is our last tenet. So I'm curious, and this is something again we talk often as best practice as in education. So I invite you to sit with this question. How do caring relationships support trauma survivors in creating success in the classroom? Maybe thinking from your own experience. whether you really benefited as a trauma survivor from caring relationships, or the ways that you've witnessed scholars really thrive and have success because of the caring relationships that you or other colleagues provided them. Let's hang out with that question for a moment. So, caring relationships help create that trust and that relationship and investment for students to feel like they can bring their whole selves. So sometimes those who've experienced trauma, again, they might have had inconsistent adults in their lives, whether they lost a loved one or um, someone transitioned out of their lives, or for a student who's had maybe many schools that they've been at, or have lost friends or family, whether that was force or by choice. Having a consistent, caring adult in their life can make such a difference. And I invite you just to hang out with this question a little bit longer. And again, I'd love for you to think about, how do you express care for your students? What are the ways that you show care? What are the ways you show care with your individual students? What are the ways that you show care in a collective? And again, I want you to pause there, and maybe you journal or maybe you explore it with a partner. But just taking stock. Now, weaving in that experience and everything you know, all that wisdom, all the love that you all put into your students, and I imagine there's many, many ways that you show care. There's just two practices I really want to highlight in my work with teens. And again, I imagine many of you are doing these already really beautifully, but I felt called to highlight them. Mindful listening. I've shared this with you all before, but I taught eighth grade for about 6 years, eighth grade humanities, and I was very strict. And I had a difficult time. This is before my own healing journey, before I was able to acknowledge my own traumas, before I went to therapy and started mindfulness. And my rigidity and my desire to create safety for my students was a little bit suffocating. And my ability to mindfully listen, I struggled. I struggled with this. And once I started, going to therapy, once I started practicing mindfulness and I started my own healing work and confronted the traumas in my life, I really discovered that I had so much more capacity to listen mindfully. And so when I went back to teach high school, I really centered this as a foundational part of creating success for especially those most marginalized. So remembering again that often our trauma survivors, they may not have had someone who really saw them for them, who listened to them, who held space for them, who gave them voice. And so it's such a gift to mindfully listen to our students. Now, I'm not saying you need to be the counselor, because that's not your role, it's not your job, and it's not appropriate. But there's many ways, even in just a moment, to mindfully listen. So I just want to emphasize these. So that might look like having journals that get passed back and forth. I did this a lot with my freshmen and sophomores, actually with all my grades at different points. They would have a journal that we would pass back and forth, and we communicated through that. And just, twice a month even, answering questions like, what is something you're most challenged by? Or what's something that inspires you? What's something that's causing you anxiety? And it was just a way for us to communicate. uh, doing circles. And this again might be a monthly thing. It might be a quarterly thing that you do, but giving everybody in the space a turn to share and listen. Quarterly one-on-one check-ins. If you have the spaciousness to do something like this, or even once a semester, and it could be a 5 to 10 minute check-in, and creating the whole group safety that's needed for some whole group shares. And sometimes in May, we might see that we've built some trust with the whole group where students feel they can share vulnerably and we can show that we're mindfully listening. We can, I'd also name emailing. Sometimes a student might share something in class and it's not the right moment to respond, but following up via email, hey, I really heard you when you said this. Repeating what you've heard. Our young people often get dismissed. They might feel like their voices don't matter. So we share and we communicate care when we repeat what we've heard, when we make eye contact, when we communicate through our facial expressions. Oh, I'm listening and I'm really taking this in. And again, following up with students to check in on them. So there's many more ways to practice mindful listening, and I imagine many of you are doing some wonderful things to create spaces of mindful listening in your classrooms. And so again, I invite you to journal or draw or reflect or communicate with a partner. Is there any ways that you might mindfully listen, especially as we move towards the end of the year and things might get a little more chaotic, or we move towards saying goodbye to some of our students, which might be hard for some of them? Or there might be a student who comes to mind that you think they would benefit from you giving just a little bit more mindful listening. So let's pause here for a moment while you reflect on that question. Again, feeling free to press the pause button if needed. Okay. So this is one of my all-time favorite practices when I discovered mindfulness, non-judgment. And practicing this deeply changed my relationship to working with teens. I think the pressure to fit in, the self-discovery that's happening as teens explore who they are and their identities as they individuate from their families, they can feel very sensitive to feeling judged. And often, I'm sure you see this in your classrooms, our young people are not so skillful in expressing their opinions and their judgments. And we might witness even a lot of bullying or teasing, some toxicity in their relationships. So a dose of non-judgment is a beautiful antidote to that, criticism and feeling of not belonging. So here's just a few invitations. And again, this is hard work. This is really inviting us to our own inner work. But I believe it can create a powerful, caring relationship and an environment of non-judgment where trauma survivors can thrive. So practicing noticing your stories and assumptions, and we all do this as humans, and it's a way we survive, right? We want to assess out the situation. And we all have our implicit bias. So really practicing noticing. Might there be students who you have bias, who you are projecting a story on? I know for myself, when I taught 8th grade years ago, I had a lot of projection towards some of the teenage boys. Having been bullied myself when I was a teenager by teenage boys, and in my not knowing, that I had not resolved some of that, I often projected some of my own experiences onto my students. Bring curiosity, ask questions. Students, young people often are told how things are or how things should be, and they have a lot less life experience than us adults. So sometimes, when we have all of our life experience, there's like, I know better. But our young people have a wealth of perspective. How can we bring that beginner's mind and natural curiosity of listening to how they see the world? Because Lord knows we need some new perspective, because there's a lot of things about how adults have been running the planet that has not been working. So, and another invitation again, we all have judgments. We are humans. Human beings. That's what we do. We judge, but don't speak your judgments out loud. Keep them to yourself. Practice asking questions. So, taking another moment here, is there a particular class or a student that you want to practice non-judgment with? Is there a situation or maybe a conflict that happened in your classroom that you can step back and just practice a little non-judgment, beginner's mind, bring curiosity? And hanging out there as long as you would like or need to answer and reflect on that question. So I'm going to skip this slide. So we have, and actually I'm going to go all the way back. Thanks for being patient with me. Yeah, to this slide, right? Coming back to these tenets of trauma sensitive care. So these all weave with each other, right? They're all interconnected and they support each other. And this is a lifelong journey, and this is the art of teaching, and something I'm constantly evolving and growing. It really is the art of teaching. How do we balance that empowerment voice choice with consistency and predictability? How do we hold students accountable? And that's a part of our caring relationships. We want to have high expectations for our students, but also be flexible, right? This is the dance. And as we get to know our individual students more, we can also learn how we can create environments where they thrive. So, my invitation, again, as you all move towards the culmination of the year and completing, how can you amplify any of these practices as we prepare for that transition, as you support your students in navigating maybe some big transitions, even moving from a freshman to a sophomore, a junior to a senior can evoke all kinds of feelings for our students. So how can we wrap them with these care, with some voice and choice, some more consistency and predictability? And I invite you, maybe there's at least one thing that you want to amplify as you move towards the end of the year. What might that be? Okay, wonderful humans. So, what might be possible for your students, your classroom, your school when you integrate more trauma sensitive practices? This is something I love to think about, especially as um, I face the reality of what we as humans are dealing with climate change, with war, with unjust policies, with global pandemics, with the pandemic of racism, all of these heartbreaking parts of being human, right? How do we continue to create containers for healing and transformation and safety and bravery among all that is? And what's possible if we can create some of that in our classroom for our young people? I love to play with that, and it gives me hope and helps me keep going, right? Our students build that awareness. They can express themselves more beautifully. They have a stronger skill set, and they can self-advocate. Our world needs empowered young people. And that's one of the reasons I feel so committed to doing this work around trauma sensitivity. Yeah. So it's been a gift to sit with you in this work over the last year. And I invite you, as always, to reach out to me. I'm a resource for you. My name is Salina May. This is my email address, and I'm available to sit and brainstorm or explore with you in any way I can. Thanks for being open to learning and welcoming this in. I'll see y'all later. Have a beautiful afternoon.